These are the only 4 ways to make electricity on a sailboat, off-grid and at sea. Wind, hydro, petromechanical, and solar. I'm going to break down and explain their practical applications in varying subgroups, each of which comes with unique pros and cons. So by the end of this video, you'll have a solid foundation of understanding of off-grid maritime electrical production. And doesn't that sound cool? But stay tuned to the very end to watch 12 other ways to produce electricity on a sailboat, but that are not practical for living on a sailboat. Alright, let's dive on in. I want to start out by acknowledging that it is actually best to have at least 2 out of the 4 types of electrical production on board, not just 1. We sailors have a saying, 1 is none and 2 is few. I have both solar and petrol mechanical electrical production on board my sailboat Adventureborne. 1000 watts of photovoltaic solar panels, and a 900 watt alternator on my 40 horsepower Volvo Penta D240 diesel inboard engine. All of that electrical power is then stored in 2 3.5 kilowatt hour DIY built lithium ion phosphate batteries. Now that we have that foundation set, let's get into the nuts and bolts. Number 1, wind. Wind turbine is actually the correct term for this, as opposed to a windmill, which would be just for mechanical power only. A wind turbine generates electricity by harnessing the kinetic energy of the wind through rotor blades that spins as the wind blows. The rotational motion of the blades drives a generator, converting mechanical energy into electrical energy through electromagnetic induction. In layman's term, the thing spins around, which generates electricity. Good to go. Alright, now there's 2 subclasses within wind power here. Horizontal axis wind turbines and vertical axis wind turbines. Horizontal axis wind turbines are a lot like my fan. It faces to whichever way the wind is blowing and it gets spun as the wind blows. This in turn either immediately here and right behind the blades or further down generates electricity. On sailboats most of the time, that power generation unit is going to be right here, and then the electrical cords are going to run down from there. A vertical axis wind turbine is basically this, just flipped this way. You don't see them very often, they're pretty unique, but all the principles are effectively the same. They are less common for large-scale electricity generation. They're great because they can capture wind from any direction and are often used in small-scale applications in areas with varying wind directions. For the purposes today, we're going to be talking about horizontal mounted wind turbines because that's what you see most often on sailboats. The reason for that is simple. They produce more power, they're a little bit easier to work on, and they have more models available. I do like seeing vertical axis wind turbines. I think they're cool and stylish, but at the end of the day, it's all about how much electricity you can produce. Alright, now let's go over some pros and cons. Pros. Theoretically, unlimited power. As long as the wind blows, these things will keep making electricity. Wind turbines are great because they make power even when the sun doesn't shine, on a cloudy day or when it's nighttime. As long as the wind's blowing, they keep making electricity. Wind turbines can make a lot of electricity during a storm, particularly when solar power won't be so viable. They're not nearly as loud as a generator. They are fairly easy to install and scalable, though only if you have enough room on board. They have no real operating cost once they're running. Alright, now let's talk about a few of the cons of wind turbines. Like anything with moving parts, it's going to wear down and break eventually. The consistent exposure to wind and weather can lead to the fatigue and wear of the turbine blades, affecting their efficiency over time as the blades come out of shape. The gearbox, which transfers the slow rotation of the blades to the high-speed rotation needed for electrical generation, can experience wear and tear, leading to maintenance challenges and occasional breakdowns. There is some noise pollution to these, though not nearly as bad as a generator. They do still produce a noise, and that can really bother some people. Maintenance on them is usually pretty straightforward, but if they break down, you need to repair them. That can be difficult, as well as finding parts to repair them are usually pretty few and far between. If they're not installed correctly, the vibration can also be annoying as you're inside the boat. A major challenge many people face is they can be very tough to mount initially. Where exactly you put them on the boat can be a little bit challenging sometimes. A lot of times people have to actually build a full stand outside just to accommodate them. As well, wind turbines add a bit more windage on a sailboat when you're sitting at anchor, just making your boat move a little bit more during a storm, as well as adding windage when you're trying to sail upwind. Another major downside of a wind turbine is if you do manage to stick your head or your hand up to where the blades are, they could hit and you're likely going to break a hand or worse. This sets wind turbines apart from all other types of electrical production in that you can get seriously hurt just while it's normally operating if you're not careful. As well, they can also rotate too fast and actually blow themselves up if their brake doesn't engage during a storm or a hurricane. And probably my biggest dislike for wind turbines is having that rotating blade means if a rope or a line, say a halyard, comes loose, it could hit that, get tangled, or break the blades themselves. That to me is a bit annoying. Final thoughts on wind turbines? I think they're a great option for really pretty much any sailboat anywhere. If you're going to be sailing on the wind, that means there's wind, and that means there's going to be power for your wind turbine that'll keep all your electrical production happening. A great way to judge wind turbines is just to look around at all the boats and see how many of them have it. I would say you're looking at about a third to half of all cruising boats have wind turbines on them. Number 2, hydro. Better known as hydroelectric, it basically means you capture the flow of water to produce electricity. Really, it's the exact same idea as a wind turbine, just underwater. Which is a big difference because water is 800 times denser than air. That means you don't need 25 knots of water speed, so the blades, fins, and propellers will be much smaller and stout. I can break hydroelectricity down into 3 categories: drop down or swing down styles, spinning drum styles, and lastly, probably my favorite would be propeller regeneration, also known as regen. The first drop down style I would say is the most common. I might see this on maybe 1 out of 10 sailing boats. Again, the principles are really simple with this. It's exactly a wind turbine, just put underwater. Number 2 is this style of a spinning drum that has a rope that goes out the back with a propeller. The propeller then spins as you're sailing along, twisting up the rope, which then in turn spins the electrical production inside the housing. This is not a style you see very much anymore. It must not have been efficient, or I'm not really quite sure what happened with it, but I think it's a unique idea all the same. And then the last one is propeller regeneration. This technology is not so new, but it's been getting a lot of improvements lately, especially with sailing YouTube channels like Sailing Uma, who've done a great job of showcasing the potential of it. With this, your propeller effectively becomes the turbine, something that's already there. It spins your drive shaft inside the boat, which in turn spins a generator. This, I would say, out of all forms of electrical production I'm going to talk about today, is probably the most complicated, though it's also something I haven't gotten to deal with firsthand, and I have no way of knowing how many sailboats would have this on them. But if I had to guess, I'd say 1 out of 50 so far. Hydroelectricity production is what I would say has to be the most interesting out of the 4 on this list. It's probably used the least out of all the ones here, but it does have a lot of potential to it. However, there's some serious pros and cons to consider. Let's start off with some of the pros. First off, yet again, there's theoretically unlimited power. As long as you can sail, you can produce electricity, and that's pretty cool. Second thing is it really doesn't make any noise. It's very silent, and that's definitely worth consideration. Like wind turbines, it doesn't need the sun to shine. It can make power day or night, it really doesn't matter. And in the case of a regen system or the drum system, it really wouldn't take up any extra room on board, which I do like that idea because space is always at a premium on a boat. However, there's more than a few cons to consider here. Like anything with moving parts, it's going to wear down and break eventually. And unlike wind turbines, it's going to be even more difficult to repair, considering this is something that has to be able to be submerged into water. And finding parts to replace things will be extremely difficult. A second con that's really a major one for me is it only makes power when you're moving. It doesn't do anything while you're stationary. Along with that, it slows you down. It's going to take some of your speed away from you, meaning you won't get to your destination as fast as you want to. And for at least the drop-down model, it can take up precious swim platform space, which is something that could get very frustrating quickly. Like I said before, using your own propeller as a regeneration for hydroelectricity I think is a great idea, and I think as the technology improves, and in the next decade I'm hoping we'll start seeing more and more electric engines on sailboats, regeneration I think has a lot of potential to work well. But as far as the other 2 systems go, I don't think very highly of them, to be honest. Especially the drop-down model, which seems to be the most popular, and I understand why. It looks fairly easy to put onto a boat, and it gives you one additional source of electricity. There is usefulness in that. However, I hear about them breaking often. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you hit something while you're out at sea, you're going to smash that unit right off, which that would be a serious pain. So all in all, I'm not a huge fan of hydroelectricity on a sailboat just yet. All right, number 3, petromechanical. Better known as a generator or an alternator, there is a difference that you should know. An alternator is a device that converts mechanical energy into AC electricity. A generator is a mechanical device that converts mechanical energy into either AC or DC electricity. Though the 2 of them are pretty similar, I would say another big difference is you're always going to see an alternator connected to a main engine, versus a generator is usually a standalone unit. So I can break this down a little bit further. Starting off with alternators, I would say you have the standard alternator that comes with your boat, and then you can also buy an improved one. Now, buying an improved one and putting a regulator on it, if you're going to be depending on it for a lot of electrical consumption, is a really good idea. On the other hand, if you just want to maybe top things off every once in a while, or just as kind of a backup emergency, leave the alternator you got. It's going to pump out a ton of electricity. Let's look at some of the pros and cons for an alternator on an engine. Pro number 1 is it's already there, you might as well use it. Space, fuel, and not much else can go wrong with this thing itself. You're already going to be putting effort into your engine, which you'll need anyway to move your boat when there's no wind, so why not get some electricity when you need it as well? Pretty much every sailboat has an alternator, it's a given. As mentioned before, you can get special ones that are meant to give even more electricity, and also they won't overheat because they're made for that sort of thing. This is very important because I've nearly burned up my alternator trying to fully charge my lithium batteries, and I learned the hard way that lithium, unlike lead acid batteries, can accept a lot more charge at once, and the alternator will burn itself out if you're not careful. One more pro of an alternator is that it does put out a lot of electricity all at once. That can be both a good thing and a bad thing, but as long as you know what you're doing, it's always good to have more electricity. Alright, now some of the cons for an alternator are, as mentioned before, they can overheat when you're trying to charge your DIY lithium battery bank. You can also just add a regulator on there so that way it doesn't put out as much electricity. Or in my case, I turn off half the battery bank so my alternator can only charge one at a time. That means it's only sending out about 40 amps, which is a lot, to that one battery bank. Another con is that you need to have the engine running, which you might not want to be putting on long hours to your engine that you'd rather save for actually moving the boat, and that means more maintenance sooner for your main engine. All in all, like I said before, every single sailboat has an alternator on the engine. It's just like the alternator in your car, it's all the same principles, it's driven by a belt, it works great. An alternator is part of my 2 ways to make electricity. Alright, now for the second way to make electricity with petromechanical, a dedicated generator. Now I could again divide this into 2 more subcategories, bear with me here. You have what I'm going to call an inboard generator. These are large generators that are bolted inside the boat. The boat's kind of made to accommodate them, and it could be water cooled. They really are a bigger system, and that's the big difference here, is that these type of generators live inside the boat and they're really integrated into some of the other systems. These generators can produce the most electricity by far. Second subcategory I talk about in here is I'm going to call them outboard generators, like a small Honda 2000 generator. These are generators that you can pick up sort of like a big heavy suitcase, and they're really well self-contained. They're air-cooled, so they're not going to be nearly as efficient, but they do produce quite a bit of electricity. It's pretty common to see sailboats like mine that will have one down below someplace just in case they need it. Alright, now the pros and cons of a generator. The first and most important is it produces by far the most electricity. Not only that, it makes the most electricity exactly how you want it, meaning your voltage, or if you want an AC, or if you want a DC, and then most importantly, it makes it exactly when you want it. You don't have to wait for the sun to shine, for the wind to blow, or for your sailboat to be moving. A generator just generates electricity. A generator obviously runs on gasoline usually, or diesel, which is going to cost you more money and require more space to hold that fuel on board. As well, there's a ton of moving parts, which means it's going to break down and wear and tear. It's also by far the loudest of any of these options for producing electricity, and it also makes nasty fumes and smoke, which your neighbors and probably you won't like. Again, because there's a lot of moving parts, it's going to break and it's going to require some mechanical knowledge to fix it. Though parts are usually easier to find because they're more common with boat parts, car parts. As well, it's going to heat up a lot, which could be a potential fire hazard, or if nothing else, just makes it hot in the room where it is, though a generator should be designed to expel the heat away from the boat. They vibrate a lot, which could be annoying throughout the boat, as well as just shaking some things loose. They don't have unlimited renewable energy, meaning they're really not green for the earth, as well as you have to have that fuel, you have to have that parts, you have to have a lot of things to make it go. Which might sound kind of silly, but compared to the other 3 options, they're kind of unlimited in their own special way. Another major downside is it takes up valuable space on the boat. If you have an inboard generator, that means that space you could have otherwise had for parts, or you could have had for any number of things on the boat to protect it from the weather. And if it's one of the ones where you bring it up and outside, well, it's inside of a locker you could have been using, or even where you have it outside, means now you gotta be careful with it. Also, another con is it's the only one on any of the things here that can really be stolen with some ease. If you have a portable generator, those things are very, very easy to steal, and often do. Another con is if you want to add an inboard generator to your boat, it's going to be a major project to do so. It will not be easy to install. Alright, closing thoughts on petromechanical electrical generators. Honestly, a lot of boats have them. I would say at least half the boats I see out here have them that are sailboats, and if it's a motorboat, it's almost definitely going to have one on there. The reason people like to have generators so much is you then don't have to have a huge battery bank, you can just produce what you need. Gasoline seems to always be nearby if you're willing to take your motorboat to a marina. And the biggest reason out of all of them, and I only mentioned it briefly because there was only a few real pros to mention to this, but the biggest one is it produces so much electricity. You can run anything off of a generator. You can run welders, you can run electric cars, you can run anything you can think of, in particular air conditioners and microwaves, and people love that. Alright, last one, number 4, solar. Properly known as photovoltaic solar power, meaning the photons from the sun hit the panel, react with the elements of the panel, usually silicone, and directly produce DC or direct current electricity of varying voltages and amperage due to an uneven power generation from uneven sunlight. So the pot shot of solar panels is, you put them out in the sun, they produce electricity. Done. I'm gonna break solar panels down into two subcategories, monocrystalline and polycrystalline. Monocrystalline solar panels offer better efficiency because they're produced from pure silicone, but are often more expensive. Polycrystalline is cheaper, but not as efficient, though if space is not an issue or you want to shade a large area, they'd be a very good option for you. The space is usually limited on a sailboat, so I do recommend going with monocrystalline for this. Alright, within solar photovoltaic electrical production, I can further break it down into two more categories. We have rigid solar panels, and then we have flexible solar panels. Rigid solar panels produce much more electricity per size, last far, far longer, will hold their rigid shape to help you get shade, can withstand higher and lower temperatures, but they do weigh more and they need to be bolted on securely, as well as they're a fair bit heavier. Now flexible solar panels, on the other hand, are a lot lighter. They can simply be tied down with rope or paracord using the grommets on the side. They'll bend and curve to fit a shape, though they aren't as efficient and get noticeably worn by the sun in as little as a year, causing a milky layer to come across. And in my case, even started a fire, which would never have happened had I had rigid solar panels. But I had to learn this lesson. Okay, so quick story, this was my very first boat fire ever. I was actually sitting up in my cockpit with my sailing mentor talking about solar panels and how safe they were, I kid you not, and out of nowhere I smelt a fire, and even a piece of burning umbrella came down and landed on my shoulder. What had happened was I had flexible solar panels that I put on top of a flexible surface, my bimini. This is not recommended. Flexible solar panels are meant to bend to a shape and then hold that shape. They're not meant to bend and flap like a flag, and that's what I basically had them doing up there. As well, I had connected a bunch of them together and then disconnected that from a source they could go away from, meaning that electricity was just kind of holding on in there. Over time, the solar panels got worn, they flexed too much and they cracked. That crack got some water in it. That water caused a short, an electrical short. That electrical short heated up the panel until it got hot enough, it caught the umbrella, which is a petroleum-based product, which is the fabric that used to make up my bimini and still makes up my Dodger top. That umbrella then caught on fire, and had I not been there, would have gone up in flames extremely quickly. So solar is by far the safest in my opinion. However, it's still not idiot-proof, as I had to learn the hard way. Now, I shared this story and this photo with other people, and I'll be honest, nobody had ever had this happen before, so this is an incredibly rare thing to happen. And obviously, I haven't shied away from solar power yet. But some important things to know about solar panels is that you'll never get the power output they say. If it says it's a 100-watt solar panel, you're probably gonna get closer to 70. The reason for that is solar panels are rated in absolutely perfect conditions. This means they super cool the panel down with fans and air conditioners, and they put a bunch of mirrors on it to get the absolute most electricity out of it they possibly could. Though to be honest, if you're in the tropics like I am, with a breeze like I've got, you get really good power output. Alright, now let's talk about some pros and cons. As far as pros go, I've got a list for you guys. First things first, and this is incredibly important to understand. There are no moving parts. Think about that. All the other things have moving parts in them. All the other things wear down because there is moving parts. Solar panel has no moving parts. It's a reaction that happens inside the panel, but nothing moves, just a flow of electrons into your batteries. This is incredibly important to understand. This effectively means it's pretty much impossible to break these things short of literally hitting them with a hammer. They require zero maintenance. Rain washes them for me. I've had my solar panels for about 3 years now, and I've had zero problems with them. The batteries, yes. Solar charge controllers, occasionally. Inverter, yeah, maybe. Solar panels themselves, not a problem. They just work year round. Because mine are rigid, I should easily get 5 years out of them and probably quite a bit more. But then when I do go to replace them, it'll be very easy to do. I can still resell them and change them out for newer, even more efficient ones. When they are working, they don't make a sound. They're dead quiet. They provide me shade. My entire bimini structure actually is just made up of solar panels with an aluminum tubing structure. This again is great for giving me shade, collecting solar electricity, and then as well underneath, the solar panels are able to cool off as the breeze goes below them. They can also be used to help collect rainwater. Theoretically, you've basically got unlimited power with these things. Though like I said, at about 10 years, they'll start looking a little milky and will not be getting the same amount of electricity. They're super easy to install. You can do it all yourself. Really, an idiot could do it. They use clips that you can't mess up that have a male and female side that once they snap together are completely waterproof. They're easy to scale up if you do want more. Just literally find places to bolt them onto, and as long as they're pointing up, they're gonna generate electricity at some point during the day. They can be mounted many different ways. They're by far the cheapest dollar per dollar for total electrical production. Now that does depend on where in the world you are. And to be fair, you use most of your electricity during the day anyway, which if you're a sailor and doing life correctly means you rise and fall with the sun, so that works out just fine. As well, solar panels work great whether it's hot or cold. Just having proper ventilation on them makes a big difference. Alright, solar panels aren't perfect. There are a few cons you should know about. Number one, they don't work well when the sun don't shine. That's really the biggest, and I don't want to say only drawback to a solar panel, but it's a very, very big one. If it's cloudy, if it's not direct sunlight, if there's something that kind of shades one little portion of it, the solar panel really won't work great in those conditions. A solar panel really requires direct sunlight to be at its most optimal, which if you know anything about the sun, then it moves around quite a bit throughout the day. So you don't get direct sunlight throughout the whole day, which means you don't get total solar production throughout the whole day. The second con that's worth mentioning is it does require obstructing your overhead position, and they do take up quite a bit of space. Though as I mentioned before, this could be a good thing. For some people on some boats, this could actually be a bad thing. I'm looking at my list here, you guys, and there's not any more cons that I could write down. Maybe you can think of some in the comments below, that'd be great. I'd love to hear them. But otherwise, solar panels are really pretty great. Yeah, I don't have much bad to say about them. I love mine, and that's that. Alright, so now you should have a good baseline of understanding about solar panels, wind turbines, hydroelectricity, and generators. None of this stuff is really that complicated, and if you just do a little bit of research, you'll learn a lot. Alright, now it's time for some honorable mentions of 12 other ways to make electricity on a sailboat that, in my opinion, are not viable. Let's dig into it. Number one, nuclear. Yeah, I'm aware that you can make nuclear power on a boat, not a boat this small. Nuclear power, not viable. Number two, hamsters on a treadmill. Theoretically possible, but it's going to be a lot of hamster feed to keep on board and a lot of hamster poop to get rid of. So, not viable. As well, I guess you could put yourself on a bike and you could pedal for electricity. It's not a bad idea, but you're going to get tired really quickly. I'd be very curious to put a human up against the power my solar panels put out. And again, I don't do anything all day for it. Number three, lots of lemons. Well, if you're a sailor, very often life gives you lemons. Why not hook them all up in series and make a whole battery out of them? Because honestly, they're going to go bad and it's really not that well worth it. So, lemons, not viable. Number four, radio frequency collection. Yes, this might sound ridiculous, and honestly it was not on Google for ways to produce electricity, but I've actually done it before. Get ready for this one, folks. Once upon a time, I sailed my boat into Marathon down the Three Sisters River, or Three Sisters Creek, which is just a little saltwater river that goes between the ocean and lagoon. There are four, count them, four large radio towers in a row that point directly towards Cuba. Those towers apparently broadcast American propaganda to Cuba. Go figure. Downside is if you park your sailboat with a metal mast, aka my aluminum mast, right in front of that thing, it'll pick up a lot of that RF frequency and it actually generates electricity from it. One guy melted a halyard from it, another guy lost all of his systems. On my boat, however, I could detect all the electricity because this here voltmeter was going whoop all the way to 16 when I disconnected my batteries and my solar production. It was a very scary moment until I figured out what it is. The downside is you would have to bring the radio towers with you, so for that reason, radio frequency collection is non-viable. Next one. Fusion power. We're almost there, but not quite. We're always almost there. So I'm going to say again, for a sailboat, not viable. Next one. Hydrogen fuel cells. Yeah, that means you need to bring more hydrogen. Not viable. Next one. Geothermal power. Now, I'm sure somebody's had some device that could drop down some little hole and while they were on top of some underwater volcano, but I'm going to say it's non-viable for a sailboat. Biodiesel. Yeah, this would be an interesting one to see what type of organic matter you could add to try to make your own diesel or a natural gas, but I'm just going to say that's going to take up way too much space, it's going to smell too bad, so I'm going to say that's not viable. Next one. A Tesla coil, if you believe in that sort of thing. Well, to be honest, actually, I would say that radio frequency collection is basically what I did. But if I had to guess, the amount of electricity it takes to send that to me would be a huge loss of electricity, so I'm going to say it either doesn't exist or it's not viable. Next one. Lightning strike collection. Quite a few sailors around the world have collected electricity from lightning. Only downside is you can't store it and it is way too much all at once. Way too high a voltage, that's for sure. And it pretty much will just always do damage. I've never heard of it ever powering someone's battery. So I'm going to really hope I don't get struck by lightning because there's nothing you can really do about it. So, non-viable. Next one. Solar heat collection. So there actually is another type of solar electrical production, but I didn't want to put it on here because, again, it's not viable. It would be something akin to the Solar One power production plant that they did, I believe, in the Arizona desert. You basically just take 100 mirrors and surround them around one large collection tower that has like a superheatable liquid at the top. All the mirrors are on little rotators, so they catch the exact amount of sun and they beam all that directly to the top. That heats up the very top, which then in turn goes through coils, heats up water, which produces steam, which turns the turbine. Super cool, but not viable whatsoever for a sailboat. It just takes up way too much space. Next one. And last but not least on the list is tidal power. Yep, tidal power is a real thing for generating electricity by using the mechanical motion of the ocean, you can quote me on that, to, I guess, move something and make electricity. Pretty simple to me, but yeah, on a sailboat we sail on that type of stuff, but we don't actually make electricity because we're not going to stick around for it. So I'm going to say it's non-viable. Alright, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I hope you learned something. Now I've got a few last closing ideas for you. So looking at all these different ways to make electricity, I want to give you guys my straight opinion on what I know has worked for me. In my opinion, rigid monocrystalline solar panels are by far the best all around for producing electricity, provided you're below 45 degrees latitude, and that you have enough space for all the panels on your sailboat, as well that you have enough house battery bank to store that electricity through the night. If so, then like me, you wake up each day and do whatever it is you want to do, and really don't worry about electricity. It's a set it and forget it setup. Though to be fair, I do check my electrical systems probably 2 to 3 times a day. However, I do have future plans to sail all the way up to Southeast Alaska, where even in summertime, it won't be a good place for solar power. So before that trip, I plan to increase my solar array, battery bank, and add a wind turbine. That will give me 3 different types of electrical production and should be more than sufficient for such an endeavor. But all that will have to be in a video for another time. Till then, thanks for watching the whole video all the way through. I really hope you learned something, and I'll see you on the next adventure. Cheers. Thanks for joining me on this adventure. I hope you feel inspired to begin adventures of your own. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For an exclusive, in-depth look at this adventure lifestyle, and to further support my channel, become a member of my Patreon crew. Link in the description. I'll see you on the next adventure.